Good morning. Be very welcome to another edition of the Seminar Environmental Action. In the name of the Management of Sustainability of Firjan, I would like to show my appreciation for all of you being here. The audience is hearing us and also our guests today. In this panel today, we will have a channel on YouTube that will have the transmission of this event in English. The link of this channel is available in the description of this video on the inferior part of the screen. This work will be done by Hermínia Williams and by Eva Gouveia. I would take opportunity also to thank Rede Brasil, Pacto Global, Ternium, and other General British Consulate of Rio de Janeiro. The support and institutional support of you during the last months were fundamental for holding this event. As you're also aware, we will have the help of a sign language Daniele Firjan from Firjan Santa Cruz and Luana Honório of Firjan Senai Três Rios. Since our participation in the Global Pact in 2018, the editions of these seminars were thematic and linked to some SDGs. In the edition of this year, during this week, we will approach the main goals of the SDG 13 actions towards climate change. Before passing the floor to Fabio, share with you the information that we are able to have open the participation Prêmio Firjan Virtual Edition 2021. The link to this and more information about this award are available also in the description of this video in our channel on YouTube. Having said this, I pass the floor to Fabio, who will moderate this panel today. Fabio, the floor is yours, and good event to all of you. Thank you very much, Peron. Good morning to all of you. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, sharing with Firjan and Global Pact and all the people involved in this organization about this subject. It's so important, that is climate change. It's interesting also to note that during this year, in spite of the pandemic, we are able to say that it's a very strong subject during the years, mainly the last months, and I can say that this strength comes mainly linked to the economic agenda, leaving more and more clear that it's not only an environmental challenge, but especially the need to transform global economy. And for this is fundamental, the planning at long term, politically and technically speaking. And this planning is the core of our panel. Consider that we're talking about a global problem with different impacts in the planet. To generate stability, governance, regulation, and justice in the treatment of diversity in several countries are crucial pillars for the success of any strategy. And I think in this context, we have this panel. We have here three important guests, starting with the Consul of British Consulate, Simon. And he has dealt with this subject for a long time. And I can say that this year, the United Kingdom has a greater challenge because it's a country that will be the host of COP26 that will be held in Glasgow at the end of next year. So it's a great challenge, and we are very anxious to hear Simon Wood's words. Talking about COP26, one of the main subjects is regulation of market mechanisms for carbon. And this subject is directly linked to our next speaker, that is Guido Penido. Guido coordinates a PMR initiative that is a project which partnership for market presence in a partnership with the World Bank and the Ministry of Economy in order to study the specification of the market of carbon in Brazil. And lastly, we will have the speech of Ingrid person, that is a great expert in greenhouse effect management, and she will show how high governance companies are preparing themselves for this challenge that is greater regarding impacts on the planet. Having done this brief introduction, I pass the floor to General Consul in Brazil from the British. I pass the floor, Mr. Simon Wood. It's a great pleasure to have you here. We're very anxious for your words.
fazer. Idealmente nós gostaríamos de fazer menos. Então, como eu disse, 5 anos, né? Mas na verdade vai ser 6 anos até que nós realizarmos o COP26. Nós estamos em 2020, passaram-se 5 anos, mas por causa da pandemia nós tivemos que estender um pouco esse prazo e vamos ter a COP26 em Glasgow no ano que vem, em novembro. É uma área muito bonita na Escócia. E, se eu me lembro, é a primeira cidade no Reino Unido que realmente prometeu reduzir as suas emissões até 2050.
Luís, pode passar a próxima slide, por favor? I hope everyone's able to see these slides. So, what is COP26 about? For us, we have 3 key priorities, which are kind of set out on the slide there. We want countries to come forward with increased, more ambitious, nationally determined contributions, the NDCs. Now is the time to be setting those targets for the NDCs up to 2030. The UK, I'm not quite sure if it's in the next few days, imminently, we will be announcing our own upgraded, more ambitious NDC for 2030. Many countries have already done so. Obviously, we want everyone to do that, and we would like Brazil to announce a more ambitious NDC as well. We also want countries to be coming forward with their long-term strategies, i.e. long-term strategies meaning reducing emissions to net zero by 2050, ideally sooner, but by 2050, which the UK has done. We announced that last year. It's part of our law now. We announced a legally binding target of net zero by 2050. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and Fabio, I think, alluded to this, we need agreement on implementation of the Paris Agreement, what was called the Paris Rulebook of how carbon markets and how international climate finance flows will work. That's the really hard negotiating bit. And we really want and need to see countries coming together to get that successful outcome. But the third element is not about the negotiated outcomes. The third element is about the real world action. I said that at the start. Taking action to reduce our emissions and to build a lower carbon future. And that's where we're really keen to work with, not just with governments, with businesses, with local governments, with all of civil society to actually, achieve that real world action. So in terms of Brazil, we want to work with Brazil closely on all 3 of those elements. Luís, pode passar. Brilliant. I don't know how easily people can see this. There are a lot of words, but on the previous slide, I talked about those areas, the nationally determined, the 3 areas that you can see on the left of that slide, the nationally determined contributions, the negotiations, and the real economy, the real world action. But we've also defined 5 key areas of what we're calling campaigns around protecting and restoring our ecosystem. So we have, on a national level, we have announced our new measures for our biodiversity and our natural environment with new funding for 2030, and we'd like countries to do the same. Adaptation and resilience is key for a huge part of the globe that is already seeing, and we're already seeing every day, aren't we, the news about the effects of climate change, the unprecedented levels of warming in the Arctic, the effects on small island nations. So adaptation resilience is something we need now. Energy, we really want a transition to renewable energy, to lower emission forms of energy. So in the UK, for example, the Prime Minister announced a 10-point plan in the last few weeks. One of those points is that the UK already has a relatively high level of installed capacity of offshore wind power. We want to increase that so that by 2030, every home in the UK can be powered by offshore wind. And offshore wind and renewable energy are one of the areas we're already working on really closely with Brazil. It's a particular focus for our work in Rio with the energy sector here. Transport, accelerating that's another campaign. So in the UK, again, the Prime Minister has announced as part of his recent 10-point plan that we will bring forward the deadline to 2030 when sales of new cars will not include petrol or diesel cars. So by 2030, you will no longer be able to buy a new electric or diesel car in the UK. That's a real technological challenge, but we've committed to doing it. And finance, related to what I said, around finance action. And finance, of course, is one of the areas where we want to help as well. The UK has a lot of expertise in the financial sector, and that is increasingly being translated into green finance. So those are some of our objectives. I want to talk a little bit about action where we can work together. Luis, pode passar, por favor. So, in this context, there is a global campaign, not a British campaign, a global campaign called Race to Zero, which is related to COP26, and it's a campaign launched by the UN, the high-level climate champions, with the UK involved, with Chile as the current presidency of the UNFCCC. And as it says on the slide, this is to mobilize leadership and support from a wide coalition, from businesses, cities, state governments, investors, to literally race to zero, to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 at the very latest, and ideally a lot, much sooner than that. It's great that we're talking in Rio. Rio is a city that has committed to net zero by 2050, and there are other cities, obviously, in Brazil that have done the same, and we want more to do the same. And as the slide shows, this coalition is now very large. It's the largest ever alliance that's committed to achieving net zero. If you look at all the businesses, all the investors, all the universities involved, all the cities, it's covering around what is currently 25% of our global CO2 emissions. So a real appeal I will make today is for Brazilian companies here to be committing to that. And of course, we have many Brazilian companies who've already made that pledge, and that's great to see. Even to name a few, Ambev, Natura, Vale, Vivo, Lojas Renner, alongside major British companies active in Brazil, such as BP and Shell. So these companies are acting because they know it's an imperative, and it is a benefit. It is good for their business. It reduces costs. It's now cheaper. The cost of renewable generation is much, much lower. It answers consumer demands as well. Consumers want the reassurance, and this is a very big topic in the UK. Consumers are demanding, not just wanting, demanding reassurance that the products and services they buy have not contributed to degradation of our climate. So that's my plea on Race to Zero. I will stop there. Thank you for listening. Delighted to take further questions and looking forward to hearing. I'm very honoured to be part of a panel of other distinguished speakers, so I'm looking forward to learning as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Consul. Very interesting to have such an interesting strategy, thinking not about copy, but also your actions. I think I would have the liberty of enhancing an issue that you mentioned since the beginning of your lecture, that is a requirement to work not only with governments, but also with the society as a whole, engage in all the transformation parties, companies, and final consumers in an ambitious program as the one that was mentioned, Ratio Zero. We can talk about this during the debate. Thank you very much. I will pass the floor now to Guido Penido to talk a bit about a very important project for our country, that is PMR project, that views to study the precipitation of carbon in Brazil as one of the drivers for transformation for a low carbon economy. Guido, I pass the floor to you. Good morning to all of you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the panelists for being here, sharing this panel, and all the audience for your participation. I'm waiting for my slides here to start. Well, as Fabio has mentioned, we're part of a project, PPR Brazil. There's a project that started in 2016, was coordinated by the World Bank and the Ministry of Economy. It started at the Finance Ministry, would be ended this year also. And it's a project about the precification of carbon that is exactly to attribute a monetary value to the greenhouse effect gases emissions. And these emissions cause a negative impact in the society and as a product of economical activity, and cause a very bad effect on the society as a whole, because they contribute to the phenomenon of climate change that today are causing economical important impacts on different business, like intensification, greater amount of climate events as we have the droughts and floods. Next slide, please. So the project started in 2016, the concept of Brazilian ratification in UNDC that talks about absolute reduction of greenhouse gases emissions, and that the fact we still don't have a defined strategy for the compliance of these NDCs. So that is economy-wide. As of what I mentioned previously, this target will imply in cost, we will have to reduce the economical activity that are the greenhouse emissions. So this will involve investments for this transition in order to comply with this. So I would like to focus on this. So I believe many people that are participating here have heard already that Brazil would have advantages, competitive advantages in the climate subject. I will continue here because I think my slides disappeared. But how are we unable to reach this? We have an energy matrix that is quite clean. If we compare with all our foreign competitors, we have 80% of a matrix involved. It's renewable, and this has a chain and all the productive chain and all the sectors that consume this electricity. And we also have a great power of forest assets that can be transformed in carbon assets and negotiated internationally. So this is something that's quite positive for Brazil. Besides that, we see also in the bank that we can have a great performance and reputation. We've seen how our Ministry of Economy, Paulo Guedes, has been mentioned in Davos summit. This was quite unexpected. The climate subject was quite unexpected. How many questions were asked to the Ministry of Economy? So we adopted a precification of carbon as the best international practice. Brazil would then align to the best international practices as expected by the SDGs, and the position of Brazil in international negotiations and also in agreements. This would allow a better access of Brazil to OECD and would create great benefits in Brazilian economy. Besides that, future possibilities, we see a great increase and participation of the European Union in looking for a regulation for the carbon. That means the regulation for exports in the frontiers, Brazilian exports to Europe with European carbon price and internal carbon domestic price could exempt Brazilian exports from this carbon adjustment. Then we could have another position with the election of Biden. So let's go back to the precification. As I mentioned, we would attribute a monetary price to this and negative emissions. In this case, we have a tool that naturally will incentivize decision makers, the companies, and the generators of emissions to internalize this cost in their decision-making process for investment and production. So the reduction of the emissions in this case will happen in a natural way as of the choices of each economical agency. This would ensure a smooth transition than other methods like standards and technological guidelines imposed by the government. This is very clear. The freedom that are tools that will ensure more freedom for the economical agents on how to reduce the emissions, how to conciliate with their regulation than other common normal tools. The government would decide how this would be done, and the economical agent would have to have it standardized. Now, in the other way, the economical agent would be able to choose when and how to have the mitigation, including not necessarily a transactional one in the market, in order to reconcile all the regulation duties. Besides that, it's a tool that is very efficient, it's cost effective, because allowing this flexibility, theoretically, you're incentivized the mitigation measures that are cheaper ones. So we are able to prove, and also in practice, we can have a gain of efficiency regarding the total cost in order to comply the target of mitigation, and this will be reached technically and in practice also. Surely we will have the confirmation of this with the principification of carbon would be the way to reach this with the lowest social cost. This is a tool that has a lot of theoretical motivation. It already has application quite huge, and it is seen as the best practice in international environments. In Brazil, we decided to focus in reduction of emissions. It would be we would have a taxation in the emissions for the greenhouse gases emissions, and the quantity would be around according to the market, and it would be a regulation that would be stricter than the other commerce of emissions, where we define the related agents and you define a total quantity allowed for emissions of these agents. There's a cap and the issue and allocate this, and it would allow then to the regulated agents to operate these emissions to conciliate their obligations. Therefore, it's regarding a trading. The market would have a cap and trading. These agents would have, as an example, about the regulators would have the option to regulate, to reduce the emissions or to operate them in the market to have the conciliation. You, for example, you have a regulating agent that has very low options for short term to reduce your emissions. They're very costly. Not necessarily they will have to reduce, but it can also choose at the first moment to buy these emissions in the market from other agents that have cheaper solutions and easier ones and have low having costs to mitigate the emissions, and in the long term they can adjust this in order to find their own mitigation. Therefore, when they decide this, you can choose a great amount of options of mitigation, not only be stuck only in one option. Okay? Next slide. So how is this in the world? In the scenario, in the world, we have a map here. All these countries here already have these specification of carbon tools scheduled or implemented. The blue ones are the ones, and the green ones are the systems. Here in Latin America, in developing countries, in general, we already have many taxation of carbon being implemented. We have Argentina, Chile, Mexico, Colombia, South Africa, perhaps because of the simplicity of implemented taxation according to the economical situation in the country that have institutions necessary for this control. But we have seen an increase initiatives of the trade of these emissions, and this is a flexible initiative that will allow international connections. Like in California, they have a connection with Quebec market, and Mexico and Colombia are also planning to implement these system of commerce of emissions because they have taxation in carbon. They have 61 initiatives nowadays implemented or forecasted, covering 20% of the greenhouse emissions in the whole world. Now we've reached the projects. So the project, PM Brazil is a global initiative of World Bank and analyzes more than 80% of the greenhouse emissions in the whole world, and it's very relevant from the point of view of absolute emissions. The greatest part of the greenhouse emissions were covered by the project, and it's a project that was considered successful in the World Bank. And we have another program, is PMI forecasted. PMR was started in Brazil in 2016, technically, and with the objective to analyze the precipitation of carbons to optimize the relation of the climate emissions. That would be the compliance of NDC, and if it would be desirable or feasible to have this kind of tool for climate change, and which of traits this tool should have if it is really feasible in order to become more effective and feasible. To answer these issues, we have an analytic structure that is quite complete. We have sectorial studies, and we have analysis, and we have a component of engagement and communication with the stakeholders. In order to embed this in our strategy and our recommendation, we have a legal and regulating analysis to try and verify issues that are legal and operational ones in the market, and everything in a mind paper that is a document that is quite concise, very direct, with simple language, and you'll be at ease that it won't be a very technical, long document. We try to do it for decision makers, and this white paper is ready and will be given to public consultation very soon with a proposal of commerce system for Brazil. This white paper doesn't give any legal commitment. It's a tool for participation democratically to discuss this proposal that came from PMR project with the society and to see if it's of interest of everybody for this tool to be part of our public policies. And specifically, we think yes, but we are waiting for the opinion of everybody. So please contribute read the white paper and send your opinions. So we'll stop now, and I thank you once again for your attention. Thank you very much, Guido. Very interesting to know the PMR project has already reached its final part, and it's interesting to know also that the study is focusing in a trade of emissions. So I think this is in fact very interesting, considering that in your words, it will help to deal with the cost and effectiveness of the challenge of reducing emissions. We talked about cost and effectiveness. It's always unavoidable to talk about the conciliation between competitiveness and climate change. And in this context, I think that Ingrid's lecture will add a lot, considering that we will have a vision of someone that is in a company with good governance, thinking in a strategic way of the best ways of mitigating the greenhouse gases emissions, considering the survival of the company in a context of competitiveness. Is that it, Ingrid? Thank you very much. And please, I pass the floor to you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Fabio. Good morning, Guido. And Simon and Consul Simon. My name is Ingrid. I'm an expert in greenhouse gases and energy efficiency of the Ternium group, which is a metal manufacturing group. So this is a material that is really carbon intensive. So I'm going to bring to you a little bit about what the metal sector has as a strategy to face this challenge, which is to reduce our emissions not till 2050 but 2070, because we're considered a sector that is difficult to reduce carbon emissions. So I'm going to explain a little bit why. So first, I'm going to try to bring into context the percentage of emissions of the metal sector compared to the global emissions. We have 8% of global emissions of greenhouse gases that are allocated to the metal sector. When I talk about the metal industry, I'm talking about the primary route, which is to manufacture steel and iron from the iron ore. And also we have the secondary path, which is the route of the furnace that uses recycled materials, so basically metal waste. So we need to know that in this context, that not only these emissions of the metal sector, that they're being accounted for within this budget or this carbon budget that I will present to you from the International Energy Agency, but also from other sectors, because at the end of the day, the metal sector, it's very important not only to manufacture steel and iron, but also to mitigate emissions in other sectors, because our products help to reduce emissions in other sectors. So just to bring this into context a bit, what is our strategy? I would like to highlight a document that was published in October of 2020 by the International Energy Agency, which is the roadmap of decarbonization of the steel sector. This is available in the website of the International Energy Agency. You just have to register. So I would advise you to download this document if you're interested. It has a lot more details than what I'm going to talk about here. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to give you an overview. But I would like to say that because we have this major contribution regarding global emissions, we also have a great responsibility to accelerate the transition to low carbon. When I say accelerate, it's because we have strategies that are short, mid, and long term. So in the short term strategy, I would say that the issue of energy efficiency is very important. It's crucial. It's in our foundation. We cannot waste energy anymore. That time is over. We need to look for operational excellency regarding operation and maintenance of all equipment in any productive path of the sector, whether it's primary or secondary. And I would highlight the primary sector because it really is what demands more energy and carbon, because it's based on fossil fuels. We have carbon, shale, natural gas. So we need to really do this transition looking the best to try to obtain the most we can from our machines. So for that, we have these programs for energy efficiency and these accreditations regarding energy efficiency in every company. I think this will make a big difference in the short term. When I say short term, I'm saying until 2025, 2030 at the most, so we can have a percentage of reduction with decarbonization. But obviously when you install the best technology and you operate it in the most excellent way, you have to continue that transition, because the technological development is being carried out so that in the long term the whole metal sector can move away from carbon. So we have the carbon direct avoidance technology for the long term, which are these technologies that avoid carbon emission, and that is very linked to the electrification of the sector as well, and the introduction of green hydrogen technologies for green hydrogen within the operations of the companies. But I'm going to leave that for later on. And I would like to highlight right now at this moment that steel is a material that's very important for the economy to advance, because without it, we're not able to decarbonize the other sectors of the economy. So imagine that to do wind turbines or solar panels, for instance, you need steel. So to be able to produce vehicles that are lighter and to be able to electrify the sector, we need steel. So at the same time that we are great contributors and we have that challenge to develop technologically in the long term to reduce emissions, steel is also a crucial element to decarbonize the economy as a whole. So within this context of the circular economy, and we cannot minimize that role, because without steel, we wouldn't be able to decarbonize the global economy. Having said that, I would like to share with you a little bit about the strategy of the metal sector. We have this document that was published in October by the International Energy Agency. We have two scenarios that were analyzed. The scenario of the policies as they exist today, which would represent business as usual, as people usually say, as if we didn't make any decisions to reduce emissions. And then we have the other scenario of sustainable development, where we consider future technologies that are still not in the technical level of, they're not mature enough to implement today, but for the long term, they are very important so that we can reach that goal of decarbonization of the sector. So the metal sector, it has a portfolio of measures or mitigation options to try to reach that long-term commitment. So in the midterm, I can tell you that to implement some technologies that today are almost like the best technologies available, they're not totally available, but they're getting there. And in the long term, we have these technologies that are still being developed. So within that mosaic of mitigation options, we have, since the more, we have from the more intense use of the waste within the metal industry, we need to have more availability within this intensive industry, and how we use the metal waste. Unfortunately, in Brazil, we don't have that much available. We have a consumption that is a bit stabilized, and we're actually able to reduce in the last decade. The more advanced economies have in that specific mitigation, they have an advantage because they have more scrap metal available. So this would be maybe the main measure that is highlighted within this scenario of sustainable development, which is this roadmap that the agency published. So we have here we have to be responsible for 40% of reduction of emissions of greenhouse gases from the sector till 2050. So, and in second place, we have that measure that would be to improve our technology. So all the companies in the world and all of the sites, they would install the best technologies available and get to the limit of the efficiency to be able to reduce their emissions within their processes. That would be responsible for 21% of emission reduction. But still, we will be dependent on carbon and shale and coke. We have these high furnaces, coke oven with oxygen processing, or to reduce directly, or this direct reduction route, which we usually use natural gas, and this with the electric arc furnace. So we need to be aware that some paths are more difficult, and these paths have to be reinvented. So we think that this classical high furnace will probably die in the future. We can't just try to do the minimum. We have to really develop these technologies to electrify the surface. So the introduction of hydrogen, whether it's gray or blue hydrogen or green hydrogen. So we also have to introduce the issue of bioenergy within our processes, and also other fuel exchanges. Of course, also a very important measure that I highlight as the third measure as an option to mitigate the reduction, the sector, which is the carbon capture and storage. So the carbon capture and storage, and the use of that carbon for other sectors, like I mentioned before, through this circular economy. So these blast furnaces, they will be reinvented. So we have, for example, some technologies that transform. We have some pilot projects of technologies that develop the waste gases of our processes, especially the blast furnaces, and turns them into fuel. For example, to produce methanol for the fuel sector. So theoretically, the fuel companies will no longer buy oil and produce fuel from oil. They could use our blast furnace gases to transform it into methanol, for example. That could be an application. Another example, and I can bring this from Ternium itself, we have plants in Mexico that capture the CO2 from our direct reduction furnaces, and part of this CO2 is then goes back to avoid, it's used in the beverage sector because the CO2 is clean up to the food degree, and it can be injected in Coca-Cola, and the Mexicans use that in the companies that they have in Mexico. So they buy the CO2, which is a waste from our process, and they inject it in a beverage, in a soft drink. So that CO2 is emitted, but it's used by the people that drink soft drinks. So it's captured from our process, it's transferred to another sector, and it's released after the soft drink is consumed. But it's a process of reuse of that CO2. So with that, the company doesn't, the beverage drink doesn't have to buy CO2 from fossil origin. So we have several possibilities regarding the reuse of CO2. And I'm also going to give you another example of capturing CO2 and producing algae. So you can inject CO2 in algae, and then the algae can become fuel as well. So we have a lot of examples. We have a lot of technology development in several countries and several initiatives. Several companies are doing that in partnership with governments. But I would like to highlight another technology, that is the issue of hydrogen. It would be 8% responsible for reduction of emissions. So this is a technology that we think that will revolutionize the metal sector. We have a lot of hope here in Brazil. I'm really in favor, and I really fight fiercely to introduce this type of technology because we have a comparative advantage which is amazing over here. So we want to produce the green hydrogen from electricity free from carbon. So carbon-free electricity without a carbon footprint to manufacture that hydrogen. So we have that possibility of introducing hydrogen as a reducing agent, whether it's for a production path of direct reduction or to be injected, for example, and to try to reduce the carbon that we use in the blast furnaces with natural gas. So we can introduce hydrogen and with natural gas to reduce the emissions of the blast furnace. So that is another solution that we are studying in several companies and us as well in Ternium, but we depend on several partnerships, so to speak, with the governments to be able to put together the infrastructure, the needed infrastructure, because as you know, we are very demanding in energy. So we need to really have a whole infrastructure to really bring solar energy and wind energy to our country to provide that type of electricity, carbon-free electricity, which is available for the transition of low carbon in the industry, whether it's in the metal industry or other industries that may also use hydrogen as a replacement of carbon to generate energy or to reduce emissions in their processes. So we need, as the Consul mentioned in his race to zero, England is promoting, fostering the wind electricity sector for the household so they can get to carbon zero. In Germany also, we have another example. Well, not only Germany, Europe as a whole, actually, we have partnerships between the governments to develop that electrical infrastructure, which is carbon-free. Not only the transportation sector can partake of that carbon-free electricity, but also for the industries. So they can also have the green hydrogen within their operations as a good mitigation option, an excellent mitigation option, avoiding in that way carbon emissions. In Brazil, I would highlight, and in some other places of the world, of course, that is not the silver bullet that is going to solve our emissions problems in Brazil, but we also have the use of bioenergy, for example, vegetal coal. And this is, of course, needs to be certified, and we need to make sure that it's not, it doesn't come from the deforestation of our native forests, whether any type of forest or a natural biome, we need to have naturally planted forests that can be sustainable with traceability. We have a lot of areas that we can work on to repopulate, and we also have a lot of other mechanisms regarding the production of ethanol, for example, which comes from sugarcane waste, and we can also develop technologies to generate green hydrogen from these agricultural waste. And also we can also use the vegetable coal to the blast furnaces, and also we can use that type of fuel in the coke plants, for example, with a blend of these reducing factors or agents, and work with all the other agents, which would be a great measure. And in Brazil, we have that comparative advantage. So we have to really pay attention to always use everything that we can to be able to reduce these greenhouse gases. And also we have the use of bioenergy in this map of decarbonization of the International Energy Agency. It would represent 6% of the emission reduction for this scenario of sustainable development. So I'm going to stop here because I think that maybe I may start talking about something very technical, but I am available if you need more information, not only regarding this roadmap of the metal sector as a whole, but of the Brazilian industry. We're doing a lot of efforts and studies to really commit ourselves, whether it's this year or next year, depending on the company, with these announcements regarding how we're going to get to low carbon, and that requires economic assessment, because sustainability is a tripod, right? We have the environmental issue, the social issue, and the economic issue, and that's all very important. So the project has to be able to stand. So, and in Brazil, we have a lack of pricing of carbon because of some government issues. It's not really a commitment of the Brazilian government, but you can be certain that the Brazilian companies are moving towards this goal because the consumers of the futures are demanding this. The electric vehicles, they will need to do this transition. The manufacturing companies, they are also requiring that. So we're an upstream of their chain, their value chain. So that's why this is being demanded by all sides. So we don't need to wait for carbon pricing necessarily, but the investment analysis or assessment are being carried out considering the price of carbon. We have already internalized that within our financial assessment to invest money in the expansion or the exchange or changing our technologies and the expansion of our sector. So this tripod, taking into account the economic issue, is very important for the metal sector because we know we cannot lose competitiveness, and we cannot also hinder a sector that hires so many people. In Brazil, we have almost 200,000 people that are employed in the metal industry in a direct and indirect manner. So we are here to bring solutions, sustainable solutions. We are warriors for the climate, and we are together in this low carbon transition. So I'm available for any questions. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share here with Guido and the Consul of the UK, Simon, this strategy of the sector, which was difficult to reduce in our sector, but we're not just waiting around. We're really fighting hard to get to the desired carbon zero. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. And it's very interesting in your words, making a connection on what Guido mentioned, that Brazil already has one of the energy matrix that is the cleanest in the world, and this reflects in industrial development also in different situations. The average of the emissions of Brazilian industries are smaller or lower than the global measures. And in this context, and with the strategy and all your words that you mentioned, we noticed that there is a very strong engagement, although in these contexts, we have a cleaner condition, but we have also seen the urgency and the requirement to go beyond, because regarding all the incentives and tools that are being created, so we have to consider all this. It's a very interesting message that you're given that shows how the companies, mainly the steel industries, have tried to work in a very broad way. Now we've reached the debate, the interaction not only among us, but with the audience and the panelists. It's an open event that is being transmitted by YouTube. And I will start this debate with a question for the Consul of United Kingdom, Simon Woods. Mr. Consul, you mentioned that United Kingdom has an initiative that is quite ambitious to involve society race to zero. Ingrid has given an example now of entrepreneurial participation in Brazil. How is the United Kingdom doing to involve the companies in this subject, especially in the Race to Zero initiative? What kind of coordination incentives are you working with in order for this to become more and more intense?
Obrigado, Fábio.
The second part is, of course, the engagement, and that is, so Race to Zero is supported, it falls under the sponsorship, if you like, of the UNFCCC. It is then supported by existing alliances for climate action. So a good example is our city alliances, C40 and ICLE, which many, I think, people in Brazil are familiar with. And we have, at a UK level, we have a high-level Race to Zero champion called Nigel Topping, who is representing the kind of UK presidency input into that. There is a Chilean high-level climate champion also representing the Chilean presidency input. Any company, any organization can join. That's fantastic, and you can simply do that by applying through the Race to Zero website. But we want to work very, very closely with those companies because we want to help create alliances, create more momentum, create campaigns and create partnerships. So in Brazil specifically, and this is happening obviously for other British embassies and consulates around the world, we are really wanting to work with local actors, local partners, so that companies, cities, trade associations, obviously like Firjan and other business support associations, to help companies understand what Race to Zero means, to join the initiative, and to kind of use that. And also, I mean, the other thing I should mention is that the Race to Zero campaign brings those organizations together so that companies can share the challenges, share their ideas, because this is more than just, much more than just PR. This is about companies making that strategic shift. And I really loved some of the examples that Ingrid gave around technologies that are already very, very appropriate to Brazil, and Brazilian industry is already using but can adopt further. So we want to be part of that effort supporting you. So for any company or organization who is interested in joining the Race to Zero, my simple encouragement is get in touch, and we can help those companies and those associations understand how to join that alliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Consul. We've just received a question from André Mel by YouTube about the trade and emissions in Europe of the gases. It's a question for Guido, although it's European emissions. André's asking and stating that this system is considered as a reference. How do you perform the inspection of these carbon credits in the Trade Commission of Brazil? How do you do this? I think that the words are many times used in the climate agenda, carbon credit, or the words change a lot. So the first thing that I would like to be very clear, that make a difference about the voluntary market and the regulated market. In the voluntary market, Brazil has had a lot of experience in its participation, as has been mentioned, about entity. It's voluntary. It has to do with projects generally. So someone develops a project, they will have some kind of mitigation of emissions. They will adopt a standard of this in any kind of emissions, and this is compared with a defined baseline. They're able to prove there has been a reduction of the emissions, and the duration of the credit is done as of this comparison between a baseline and the project. And you can sell this to international people that are willing to have a credit. This is a voluntary participation. In Europe, we have the trade emissions that start in 2005. This is a regulated market. The governments define the participating entities based on criteria of sectorial scope and the size of the companies. And then the government will define the scope of participants, and they will issue the rights for emission. These rights for emission, they have a number that's compatible with what is defined. They're issued by the government and distributed among the participants. So by auctions or by other kinds of means. Specifically for the rights or license for emissions, this is called emission allowance in Europe. This credit is endogenous. The government is created in a compatible level with the cap. It's defined and predefined and issued by the government also. So we don't have verification of this. We can check of the compliance. The clients are regulated agents between their emissions regarding the report of the emissions, and also compare with the other. Apart from this, participants of the European market have a specific percentage and use credits of carbon for compliance. Brazil sold a lot of MGL to European market at the very beginning of the European market as of 2008, and then they didn't accept them from Brazil. They started only accepting from the illicit ones. So Brazil had a specific loss regarding in the demand of these NDRs. So these carbon credits of the European market have a process of verification of the predefined credits, and the trend that more and more, at least as it would be desirable to have standardized criteria, technically based and comprehensive, because nowadays we have interesting criteria to deal with issues that in past were not approached, like carbon of the soil, avoided deforestation. So we have advanced quite a lot with this methodology. So it's important for Brazil to regulate this according to the Paris Agreement, and it has to do with our policies. Thank you very much, Guido. And I will come back now with a question now to Ingrid that was done now by Carlos Vital. I think you've mentioned this in your presentation, but perhaps we can deepen this. Carlos is asking if in the energy transition of Ternium, the natural gas, considering that Rio de Janeiro may have an important power in this, how is natural gas considered in this strategy?
Thank you for the question, Carlos. This is a very interesting question. And I can tell you that for us and for the whole sector, the metal sector as a whole, natural gas, and for the world, natural gas is a fossil fuel, but it's a transition fuel. So certainly it's considered, and both for new technological paths and within the blast furnaces, we definitely consider it within the roadmap of our company in Brazil. But we see it, as I said, like a bridge for the future, like a transition fuel. So the goal is for the long term is to have green hydrogen and to make the most of that comparative advantage of the sun and wind for the production of green hydrogen. So we have, obviously, as I told you, we have to internalize the cost of these mitigation options, whether it's for the mid or long term, and we are studying that when we announce our roadmap that we will do in 21, a roadmap for decarbonization we will launch in 2021, but certainly natural gas is within our scope, but in a transitional manner. So we have that desire to also develop technology to have this carbon direct avoidance that I mentioned earlier, to be able to get away from carbon. But of course, we can't just we can't be unrealistic. So in the midterm, natural gas is a very interesting solution for the metal sector. So we consider that within our mitigation options.
Thank you, Ingrid, for your answer. And now I will have a question for the Consul, Mr. Simon Woods. Mr. Consul, at the end, how did the pandemic impact not only multilateral negotiations that the United Kingdom is at the head, they have a great task to reach the COP26, but also regarding other actions of participation with the society? How are you feeling and how are you seeing the impacts during this year and during the next months?
Really good question. I mean, there's a very obvious practical implication, which is the summit itself is delayed by a year. But as we're doing today, virtual engagement has changed completely this year. So the negotiations, the technical negotiations, have still proceeded well virtually. Obviously, that's ongoing, and many of those won't be concluded until the summit. When it comes to the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, many countries have still come forward and announced their ambitious NDC. And there's no reason that companies, although we will celebrate that and kind of and bring that into the Paris Agreement, if you like, at the summit next year, there is absolutely no reason for countries to hold back on announcing. In fact, there is every reason to start implementing them now, isn't there? Those upgraded, more ambitious, nationally determined contributions. One thing, I suppose, the pandemic has taught us lots of things. The pandemic has taught us how interdependent and vulnerable. So I think my screen may have frozen temporarily. I hope people can hear me.
Estamos te ouvindo, Consul. Pode continuar.
So we've learned how interdependent and vulnerable we can be. And I think that has to go into our thinking of how we, as we look at climate action and how we bring that together. We have to. There's a term that everybody is using that's really important. In English, we call it "build back better." As our economies recover, we've got to do so in a sustainable way. So the sustainability aspect of how we use our resources, how do our supply chains look, what is the transparency in our supply chains is, I think, a really important aspect. And sustainability in the sense of, obviously, impact on environment and climate. If we're talking about recovery of the energy industry, we're talking about doing it from now, in a sustainable and renewable way. I think the other thing is about equality. So again, as we look at increasing access to resources and energy supply, we've got to do so in a way. And again, the technology is really interesting around, for example, solar, for its potential to help the poorer parts of the world and help avoid vulnerability. And maybe the last aspect is around finance. I think what we are seeing ever more, we're all facing big recessions. So our access to finance depends on international collaboration. It depends on agreement on things like carbon markets, and it depends on financial mechanism. It depends on green finance. And I think the institutional investors of the world are very, very clearly saying they are no longer going to invest in things that are not environmentally sustainable. A huge company like BlackRock, as a huge investment organization, has been crystal clear that it will not invest in things that it considers to be to have negative environmental impacts. I hope that answers the question.
It's not an easy answer, Consul, but I think it gave some ideas on how things maybe reach an agreement in spite of all the challenges, especially about the systemic awareness, the interdependence, as you've mentioned. I imagine that we could apply this in a very special way in the climate change also, that is globally recognized as the greatest challenge of a collective action in the history of humanity. So it's a challenge that surely will leave a lot of lessons for all of us. We have another question here, Guido, regarding governance system of an eventual pricing system of carbon in Brazil. How do you see the evolution of this, considering our institutions, democratically and republicly speaking? This is another question for you. Okay. We've seen internationally that many governance systems for the emission systems in the whole world have a public scopes, others have private participation. California, we have CI, that is a private entity, non-profitable one that helps the system, some issues that are technical ones. In Brazil, perhaps the most complete way would be a new regulating agency, but this also brings many challenges regarding the institutions of the government. It's not easy to create a new agency. Maybe we need a flexible system, and the indication that we have is to try to foster the private participation in this market, to see a similar design of California, having with a non-profitable company giving technical support and some operational service to the market when in the implementation, like the inspection, the secondary market, and so on. So these are different models that are possible, some with private participation, others with public participation. But the good news is all of them are working quite well, and we could create perhaps what is more adaptable to the specificity of Brazil. It has to have public participation anyway, because as the regulation at the beginning, we have to foresee, it's not an objective, but we have to foresee the possibility that it's necessary to apply some penalties in case the regulated agents are not complying with the regulation. We have to have a kind of inspection power to comply with this. So we should have a public entity as a regulated body responsible for the oversight of the system. But we could think anyway in different ways to be an institutional framework. And we saw this in the PMR, and in the white paper we have some suggestions. Thank you, Guido. Another question from YouTube, and for you also. These other technologies regarding the roadmap and also the application here in Brazil, in your understanding, can they be considered as solutions in COP26, although they're not linked to the negotiations, but as paths for the whole world to be able to follow? Well, just to be very clear, these are options of mitigation that are available for the whole sector in the whole planet. Here in Brazil, I highlight the issue of bioenergy because we have this comparative advantage. We have a lot of biomass. Besides this, I also would like to enhance the green hydrogen. That would be a good solution for the country, but this should be put in a route of direct reduction that we still don't have this technological path operationally here in the country, but maybe an expansion of the steel sector could come from this direct reduction path. And surely this could be used as an example to be not only to Glasgow COP, but also for the future in all the meetings that we'll have in the future. I would like to highlight a measure today that we call no regret, without regrets. It's energetic efficiency, the energy. I think this is a base. If we're wishing for new technology for the future, this is something. But what can we do today? What do we have in our starting action now? We have to end this mentality of waste. We have to be very diligent and very strict regarding the use of our energy. Not only how we acquire, but how we use, how to operate our equipment. So I would like to enhance, I would like to also to draw the attention not only the steel sector, but all the Brazilian industry regarding the energy issue. This is something we can do nowadays, and this would capacity build our professionals. It will improve the performance of our equipment, mainly reducing the operational cost in the operations, which would also bring more profit for the companies. So it's a win-win relation. Energetic efficiency is without regret measure. We have to go with all our strength regarding the energetic efficiency, implementing standard ISO 50001 regarding energy in all Brazilian industries, not only in steel industry, because it's a starting point that we can do now, today, and I'm very proud to have been participated in the implementation of Ternium Brazil. And we have, I feel like I belong to the team, to the company, and we haven't done this in an integrated approach. That is a very great challenge. It's intensive carbon, as I mentioned, and I think that we cannot just wait for the future to arrive. We have to act today, and I make an appeal to all the carbon managers, energy managers of the Brazilian industry. Please take it seriously, the management of energy, implement energy efficiency yesterday, because even if it's a limited space for the reduction of emissions, it's important for reaching the operational excellency. And I think Brazilians never give up. So I believe we have a lot of things to learn and improve within our factories, inside our factories, so we can take this example to the rest of the world. Interesting that you mentioned it is in our win-win. And also you mentioned nationally in the portfolio of alternatives we talk about by energy, 100% technology developed by Brazil that can be used also in the steel industry, and the use of the soil, sustainable soil, that industrial production. So these are subjects that are very interesting for us to consider and talk about. And talking once again in COP26, we also have here a new question here on YouTube about the negotiations regarding Article 6 of Paris Agreement. Article 6 is exactly where we regulate new tools for carbon markets according to the Paris Agreement. We have a mechanism of clean development that is a tool still effective in the Kyoto Protocol, and the idea of Article 6 is to have a transition between this MDR tool that, as Guido mentioned, had a very great importance for Brazil. It was a means of implementing many policies, and we have an expectation here of transition of this mechanism to new mechanisms according to Paris Agreement, respecting, of course, the integrity processes, considering existing regulations, and so on. So in this context, how can we see the evolution of the negotiations, Article 6 in the Paris Agreement?
Obrigado, Fábio.
Article 6 much better than I can. Thank you. So the negotiations are ongoing. I think, to be honest, on current progress, these are negotiations that will have to be concluded at COP26 itself next November. We don't currently see a prospect for concluding them successfully sooner than that. And that's because of a number of technical issues as well as political issues. And issues to do with baselines, how to count previous credits and so on. This is what I would say is that this is a really key part of our relationship with Brazil. Brazil is a absolutely key player in the Article 6 negotiations. So the discussions on Article 6, although the negotiations are ongoing and led by obviously the technical negotiators, at a political level, this is a very, very fundamental part of the work and the dialogue we have with the federal government in Brazil. So we have three areas we're working on as part of our COP26 aims with Brazil. One is the NDC itself and encouraging Brazil to come forward with a renewed and more ambitious NDC. A second area is, as you might imagine, we are supporting many programs in Brazil that are designed to combat deforestation. And we would love to work even more closely with the government, and we would love to see even more action to combat deforestation. And because that is critical for the planet, it is also a part of Brazil's own NDC. And the third area is precisely as I said, it's working together to try and achieve agreement on Article 6. So those are our three priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Consul. Thank you very much. We all know that, in fact, this is the most challenging thing regarding the COP agenda, together with the requirement of boosting the ambitions of the NDCs along the timeline. These two subjects have a benefic interface if they're correctly negotiated and operated. We're reaching now at the end of our event, and I would like to pass the floor back to our speakers for them to give their final words. As Mr. Consul has spoken, I will pass the floor to Guido. Please, Guido, your final words. Okay, Fábio, I won't be long. I've spoken a lot already. I would like to thank once again the presence of all of you and invite all of you to participate, as I mentioned, the white papers consultation tender that will be very soon, and I'm at your disposal to clarify your doubts. You can send me emails if you're interested. So I think this is a very good path for Brazil and brings many more opportunities and costs. Brazil is positioning itself with a forecast, and becoming a leader in this agenda can take advantage of many benefits, including economical, social, besides the environmental ones. So I thank you very much once again. Thank you, Guido. Ingrid, please.
Thank you, Fábio. Thank you, Guido and Simon, for sharing with me this strategic moment for decarbonization. I have 4 takeaway messages. There's no management without measuring, there's no efficiency without excellency, there's no efficiency without transparency, and there's no evolution without leaving our comfort zone. So I want to leave you a message, the message that we as a steel industry, we're not paralyzed. We are looking to evolve. We already left our comfort zone a long time ago. So we are studying and we're working to get to that goal, which is carbon zero, as soon as possible, according to what it may be possible with the technological development that we desire. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share knowledge with all of you. And I'm also available to be able to answer any other questions. If anyone wants to get in contact with me, I'm on LinkedIn. So if you want to get in contact with me over there, I am available to extend this debate. And I'm happy to promote this agenda within these industries that are carbon and energy intensive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. Mr. Consul, please, your final words.
Obrigado.
For this opportunity. I think it's been a great discussion and debate. Secondly, maybe I should stress 2 words. One is leadership. I talked about the role that governments play, but at the end of the day, it is societies, and in particular it's business, that are going to drive this low carbon transition. That's already happening. People understand, businesses will lead the way in net zero, in transforming our lives, and in responding to the concerns that consumers have. So that leadership role is really important. I'd stress partnership as well. We want to work together on this. A big part of our approach to COP26 is about partnerships. And therefore, if we can do anything, if we can help organizations, businesses, civil society to join Race to Zero, to kind of join together in partnership, then please, I'm at your disposition, my team at your disposition. We'd be delighted to thank you again.
Obrigado mais uma vez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Consul. And I believe these words are so optimistic, they're quite understandable, because we've seen that although the great challenges, we're talking about the greatest challenge of collective action of humanity, we've had 3 examples that are quite interesting from different spheres. We've seen in the talk of Mr. Consul how a government that has a gigantic challenge of coordinating a multilateral negotiation, how you have acted in a proactive way, even in this pandemic situation, overcoming, trying to find common issues, initiatives of civil society and private sector, and also the government. I think all these informations that Mr. Consul has given us are very interesting in this context, that although the greatest challenge is still feasible to reach a roadmap for the success in COP26, that will give a regulated framework multilaterally for the planet to act. And these words are very, very important nowadays. Multilateralism, the possibility to coordinate actions among different countries, may make a big difference, not each one acting by themselves. The cooperation has to be done more and more intensively. And also seen in the presentation of Guido, how this same context, in spite of our challenges as Brazil, can also be dealt with sophisticated tools, innovative ones, and national market of carbon is something that is not simple, but can generate solutions that are important regarding cost effectiveness of the efforts that have to be undertaken in order to reduce the emissions. Even Brazil already being one of the countries that have energy matrix, the cleanest in the world. We also have our challenges as a country, but we also can notice that this kind of structural projects have room here, especially when they're done in partnerships among government and civil society and private sector, among other agents. And lastly, I think the same message of optimism is more clear in what Ingrid mentioned, that in spite of the steel sector being one of the intensive ones, and because of this, it has a great challenge also under the mitigation of the emission. It can also provide solutions for other sectors to generate energy and low carbon processes. I believe these words also show how the total economy is interdependent, and we as human beings, from the political point of view, we have to reach a great effort for a consensus. We have technological solutions, of course. They're not all ready and available at the beginning, but they may be escalated and optimized in order for these challenges to become more and more feasible. And it's not by chance that the Paris Agreement has forecasted that the goals of respective countries, the SDGs, be escalated in 2050. When we talk about zero carbon up to 2050, it may seem an enormous challenge, but we can also do this little by little. Of course, the consensus says it's more and more necessary. So I believe that with all these final words, I would also end my participation in the event. I thank very much Firjan, Paulo, and all the ones involved for the invitation, the possibility of being here and participate in this interaction. I would like then to pass the floor to Jorge Peron for Firjan, for him to give his final words. Thank you very much, Peron, once again, and I appreciate your invitation. Fabio, thank you very much for your final words. I think you wrapped up the main issues and the main information and messages of each of the panelists that brought each within their approach, our participation. This panel that we brought this complementary vision, this broader and comprehensive vision for us to bring a diplomatic vision, a governmental one, also a practical vision of the industry. So these initial objectives were attained entirely, and you were able to wrap up and see and extract from each panelist the main words. And I thank you very much for all this and for your mediation. And also, likewise, I would like to thank Consul Simon Woods for his participation, Ingrid also for her partnership of always, for her participation, and also Guido for having brought all his updated information. As I noticed, everybody was very anxious in receiving and knowing this information. And before ending, I would like to mention two agendas and to highlight two agendas that Firjan has been working quite intensely for a long time. They were exactly approached directly or indirectly in this panel today. The first one was exactly the agenda of the SDGs. This agenda, our event had as a central focus, SDGs 13, the goals of SDG 13 that we will talk about during this week, but today we talk SDG 7 that talks about energy, SDG 9 that talks about the structure, SDG 11 that talks about cities and sustainability, and SDG 12 talks about productions and conscious consumption, 13 about climate changes, and the 17 that talks about partnerships. So all these SDGs were mentioned, but with a direct impact in all the set of SDGs of the social axis and also the economical axis of these 17 SDGs that are part of this agenda. So as I mentioned yesterday, this reinforces the notion of the indivisibility of this agenda and also the requirement of considering the SDGs as a whole and not a specific SDG. And finally, the need that we've seen in the first panel on Tuesday, and the second panel yesterday also, and today, the agenda of circular economy. Ingrid mentioned a lot about and gave a lot of examples about the symbiosis of the industry. That's one of the approaches of the circular economy. And just to give a spoiler to you, the panel of tomorrow, Firjan is already committed with this agenda of circular economy for more than 6 years. And tomorrow, we will launch a product. We will announce the launching of a product that has to do with, reinforces our message for the commitment of the agenda of circular economy. For tomorrow, for those who knows the residue plan of Firjan, we will talk about remodeling of this residue plan that will be available for the companies and society. Having said this, I would like to invite you to tomorrow's panel that will be in this channel also as of 10 a.m. when we'll present panel 4. We'll talk about funding for climate. We will have the presence of Marcos Cantarino, ACME, Rafael Stein, of NDCs, and Guilherme Teixeira Citauri. This panel will be mediated by Rodrigo Santiago of Michelin. So having said this, I wish you all a very good day, and I hope to have you all tomorrow in our panel. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.